Hi everyone. So today's lesson is going to be on points, lines, and planes. In geometry, you have three undefined terms. So what it means when it says that these terms are undefined, it means that these terms don't have a formal definition. So what we have listed in this table, we can think of more of characteristics instead of being a formal definition. These three terms that we're going to talk about cannot be measured. We'll talk about the difference between something that can be measured and can't be measured a little bit later in this lesson. And these three undefined terms are used to define other geometric terms that we're going to talk about this year in geometry. So the three undefined terms, like I mentioned, are points, lines, and planes. So the first one we're going to talk about is a point. A point is just a single location. It doesn't have a shape or a size. It is just represented in a geometry diagram as a point. And then it will have a letter next to it, which is how we name that point. Okay, so it is just a single location. It doesn't have a shape or size. We can't measure that point. You're really just thinking of this as a single location. So if I wanted to name or refer to this specific point, I would call it point A. All right, you're just naming it using that capital letter. Next, we have lines. So lines are made up of an infinite number of points, and a line is going to have a single dimension. So in this line here, this line is going to go on forever in both directions. And we represent that with these arrows at the end. That tells us, even though we can't draw that these lines go on forever, we know that it does. Okay, so here we have this line. It has 2 points on it, points B and points C. When we go to name lines, there's a couple different ways that we can name lines. So the first one is if you look off to the side, there is a lowercase cursive letter there. So one of the ways that we could name this line is by calling it simply line H, because we see that cursive letter at the end of the line. The other way that we can name it is by naming or by using 2 points that are on the line. So line BC is one way that I could name this line. So this would be read line BC. Okay, that's how you would pronounce that. And this little notation here up at the top is telling us that it is a line. We see that we have arrows in both directions, and that's going to tell us that we are talking about a line here. We could also say line CB. Okay, the order doesn't matter because it is a line. Okay, so you want to use any 2 points that are on the line. Okay, so for example, let's say there was a point X here. I could call this line XC, and it is the same line as line BC and line CB. Okay, just a different way to name it. And then finally, we're going to talk about planes. So a plane is 2-dimensional. It's a flat surface that extends infinitely in all directions. So you want to think of a sheet of paper here. Okay, so it's a sheet of paper, it's a flat surface, and in geometry, that plane is going to extend forever in all directions. We don't draw arrows here, but you can kind of just imagine that that plane is going in all of those directions. We use a parallelogram here to kind of represent that this is a plane. So your plane is going to have an infinite number of points, an infinite number of lines on that plane. When we go to name planes, there's 2 different ways that we can do it. The first is you'll see that sometimes there is a lowercase, or I'm sorry, not lowercase, an uppercase cursive letter in the bottom right corner, or really just it could be in any corner of the plane. So here we could use plane. This is a cursive G. The font's a little weird. Let's let's do like a real cursive G. So we could say plane G here. The other way that we could name it is plane DEF. Okay, so you're going to use any three non-colinear points to name a plane. Okay, so I could say plane DEF, I could say plane FED, EFD. The order doesn't matter of the 3 points. All right, and we are going to talk in just a second about what it means to be non-colinear. Okay, so before we talk about what it means to be non-colinear points, we're going to talk about what it means to be colinear points. Okay, so colinear means that your points, or your really it would have to be points here, your points lie on the same line. So it's points that lie on the same line. Okay, so I cannot draw one single line through these 3 points DEF. Okay, I can't do it. So these 3 points would be non-colinear. If I had something like, if I had a line here that went through DF and we could call that point H, that would be, these 3 points would be colinear points. So I wouldn't be able to name this plane DHF, okay, because those 3 points are all on the same line. And we'll kind of see an example of why we can't name it that way in a couple examples. All right, but it's really important there that there are 3 non-colinear points. Okay, coplanar would mean that just like colinear is points that lie on the same line, coplanar would be points, or you could be talking about lines or segments or rays, which we'll talk about in a little bit. Any of those that lie on the same plane. Okay, so right now I'm just going to say points or lines that lie on the same plane. Okay. All right, so we're going to practice just using this notation for point signs and planes, identifying point signs and planes, naming them, and all of that using these diagrams. So we want to be really careful about using proper notation, and that's kind of referring to how we name them. So the big thing here, the only big one that we want to really focus on is with these lines, that notation that we are using 2 points that are on the line, and we have those arrows there. Okay, so number 1, give another name for line B. So if I look here, I have this plane. It looks like I have 2 lines on it. And this line here would be line B. Okay, this one I'm going to highlight right here in blue. That would be line B. So if I want to name another name for line B, I'm going to use any 2 points that are on that line. So I could say it's line LM. I could say it's line LO. I could say it's line MO. Okay, all of those would be appropriate names for line line B. Number 2 is asking me to give another name for plane X. All right, so plane X is this whole entire plane. If I want to pick another name for it, I'm going to have to use 3 points, and I want to make sure those 3 points are not on the same line. Okay, so here I could use L, M, and P. If I look at those 3 points, they are not on one single line. So I'm going to call this plane LMP. Okay, with planes, we just write the word plane and then use those 3 non-collinear points. Okay, again, I could say there's a lot of options here. I could say plane LMQ. I could say plane NOP. And there's a lot of different options here. I could change the order, so plane PML, all of those would be acceptable. Number 3 says name the intersection of the lines, of the lines A and B. So here's line A, here's line B, and if I have 2 lines, they're going to intersect at a single point, and that single point looks like it's point M. All right, so that would be my intersection. Anytime you have 2 lines, they will always intersect at a single point. Number 4 says, are points L and Q colinear? Are they coplanar? So, all right, we have 2 different questions we want to answer here. And this first one is kind of a little bit of a trick. It says, are points L and Q colinear? So if I look again, here are my 2 points. They are not on the same line in these diagrams, okay? So I'm going to say no, they are not on a single straight line. Technically, there is a line that goes through those 2 points, but when we're answering questions about diagrams, we don't really focus on that because, like we said, there's an infinite number of lines on this plane anyway. We're really focusing on the ones that are drawn. So we're going to say no, they are not on the same line. Are they on the same plane though? Yes. All right, they are both on plane X, so we would say those 2 points are coplanar. Okay, number 5, name a point that is not colinear with point N. So we could also say that they are non-colinear points. So N, we could pick any point that is not on line A. Okay, so we could say L, we could say O, and we could say P. So either one of those, I'm just going to say point P is not colinear with point N. And then number 6, can you name plane X, plane QMN? All right, in this case, the answer is no. We cannot name plane X, plane QMN, because those 3 points are colinear. Okay, and when we are using points to name a plane, they have to be non-colinear points. Okay, so let's learn 2 more geometric terms. So the first one we're going to talk about is a line segment. So a line segment is a part of a line that consists of 2 endpoints and all of the points between them. A line segment can be measured. So I could take out a ruler and I could measure this line segment and find out that it's 1.5 inches long or something like that. Okay, so a line segment can be measured. That's the first geometric term that we are going to talk about that can be measured, and it is a part of a line, okay? If we want to name a line segment, we are going to use the 2 endpoints. Okay, so my 2 options here would be to name this WX. All right, and I would read this as line segment WX, or I could say this is line segment XW. Okay, so you want to use the 2 endpoints. Okay, sometimes when you're talking about when you're looking at a line, you have more than 2 points, right? So if I added point Y here, I have to use the endpoint so that I know which piece I'm talking about. So if I was talking about line segment WY, it would just be this piece here, where WX is going to be the whole thing from start to finish, okay, from endpoint to endpoint. Notice that in our notation, we don't have those arrows that we did for the lines, right? So with the lines, because this is a line that goes on forever and ever, we have those arrows there. In a line segment, we are not going to put those arrows there because we do have endpoints. Okay, some people kind of draw in those endpoints. I think that's sometimes makes it look like an arrow, so I just draw that straight line there, okay? And then next we have a ray. So a ray is another part of a line that starts at an endpoint and extends forever in the opposite direction. So this cannot be measured, right? Because this ray is going to go on forever and ever and ever and ever, all right? But it does have a clear starting point. It does have an endpoint, okay? So this here would be my endpoint. My endpoint here is point Y, okay? That is going to be important when we name it. So when we name this, this is going to be ray Y, Z. Okay, so again, this is ray Y, Z. Okay, and we're going to name it using we're going to start with the endpoint, okay, and then a point that goes in that direction. All right, and then any other point that's on either that right or left side that shows you this is where we're going to go forever in that direction. Okay, so we want to name using, I shouldn't say an endpoint, it only has one, using the endpoint and a point in the other direction. Okay, all right, so in here, when I use my notation, you do want to be careful to make sure that you do not have an endpoint, you don't have an arrow at that endpoint. Okay, so Y is my endpoint, I don't have an arrow. It's going to go forever in that direction where it goes past point Z, so point Z is going to have that arrow above it. It would not be proper notation to name this ray ZY, okay? This is not correct. All right, because Z is not my endpoint, it's not extending forever in that direction with Y. So here, the order does matter. With line segments, with lines, it didn't matter which letter was first, but in array, it is important. Okay, so now we're going to answer some diagrams. We're going to still see some points, lines, and planes, but now we're going to add line segments and rays into this. So number 7 says name the ray on plane R. Okay, so this is the diagram I'm using for numbers 7 through 12. All right, here's plane R. Name the ray on it, okay? So I do just want to quickly talk about what this kind of diagram is. So this is a plane here, and we have a line going through it. But you kind of want to imagine this where, like, if you took your pencil and you poked a hole through your piece of paper and you had some of the pencil showing above and some of the pencil showing below, that's kind of what this looks like here. Okay, so we have this flat plane and then line L is intersecting it, okay? Like if you just poked a hole through your paper, all right? And your pencil was kind of going up and down and your paper was flat. Okay, so the ray on plane R would be this ray AD, and again, I want to make sure I'm doing that proper notation. So A is my endpoint, that's not going to get an arrow, it goes in forever with that direction of D, so D gets the arrow. Okay, number 8, give another name for line K. Okay, so if I look at line K here, line K is the one that's going through that plane. All right, there's 3 letters that are on that line, so I could name it a couple different ways, right? I could say this is line CE. I could say that this is line EF, or I could say it's line CF. Okay, either one of those would work, and of course, like EC, FE, and FC would also work. Number 9, what is the intersection of plane R and line K? So again, if we're imagining that piece of paper has that pencil going through it, it is going to intersect at this point E. So point E is right where that pencil is going through that paper. All right, so here we have point E. Is point C coplanar to plane R, right? Now you have to imagine, let's say if this was your pencil here, right? Maybe point C is where the eraser is and point F is where like the tip of your pencil is. So lines or point C, right, is actually above that plane. All right, it is not coplanar. It is not on the same plane as plane R. All right, so we would say no here. Okay, and just in case we need a little reminder, it is above the plane. Sometimes it's a little bit hard when you're looking at these diagrams on paper to imagine what they look like in a 3D space. Number 11, name a line segment that is on line K, right? So here you have a whole bunch of line segments. We have CE, we have EF, and then we also have CF, okay? But when we name these, all right, we want to stick to just having those endpoints there, okay? And I'm just going to add this last one. You only had to name one, but these would be your 3 options, okay? And number 12, name a point that is colinear to point F, okay? So colinear means they lie on the same line. So here, point F, it would be C or E. All right, both of those answers would be acceptable. Okay. All right, now we're going to look at this next diagram, and this one's a little bit more complicated. So here we have 2 planes. All right, so we have plane B. Probably should have started with A, but that's okay. All right, so here is plane B. And then here we have plane A. All right, so this is kind of like if you had like 2 index cards, and sometimes if you kind of cut the index card, if you cut one of them like almost all the way through, you can kind of put the other index card through it. I'm not sure if this is making sense if you can't really see me. But it shows you that you're going to have 2 planes intersecting, okay? And the intersection of those 2 planes, all right, is going to be a line. So here, that line is where your 2 planes intersect, okay? That's why when we're naming a plane using 3 letters, we want to make sure they are not on the same line, okay? Because then you could be talking about one of 2 different or possibly 3 different planes if those 3 points were on the line of intersection there. So here, name the intersection of planes A and B. It looks like we have this line here. We don't have a little letter at the end. So the only way that we can name this line here is by using the 2 points that are on the line, which would be G and H. Okay, so this would be line GH. Okay. Number 14 says name a ray on plane A. So let's kind of erase some of this. Focus on plane A, which is that one that I highlighted in blue. All right, just focus on this one. So if we wanted to name a ray on it, we have this line here. All right, and we can name a ray on that line. So we could say GF is a ray. We're starting at G and then going through F, okay? Now, even though it does extend in this direction as well, if we're just starting at that point, that would be the end point of our ray, okay? You could also say something like FH, right? Maybe you had a ray that's starting at point F and then going forever, oh, I'm sorry, not H, FG, right? Because there's arrows on both sides, okay, you could pick either direction. And that's only because they do have those arrows on both sides. All right, next one, it says name a line that lies on plane A, but not on plane B. Okay, so here we have to pick this line that we were already just talking about, line FG. So the two lines that are on plane A, if we look, it's going to be this one here, right? This line FG, and this line here, line GH. Both of those lines are on point A, but line GH is also on plane B. Okay, if you kind of think of that plane that looks like it's kind of facing down, or I guess facing up, depending on how you're kind of looking at it. So here we have to pick this one here, this line FG. Okay. Number 16, are points I, G, and J coplanar? All right, so let's focus on those 3 points. All right, so we have points I, J, and G. So I and G are both on plane B. J and G are both on plane A, but they are not all on the same plane. So this one is no. All right. Next, we want to name a line segment in the diagram. We have a couple different line segments we can choose. We can choose FG, we can use GH, and we can use HK. All right, any of those would work. I'm going to use GH. All right, so this here, let me erase that. All right, this would be a line segment. Okay, again, we also could name line GH. We can reference line GH. We did that for the intersection, but if it's just asking for a line segment, we are just looking at a piece of that whole line. All right, can get a little confusing. Okay, and then number 18, true or false, ray KH is a ray in the diagram. So here, if I look, okay, this means my starting point would be, or my end point would be K, and then I would go forever in that direction of H. All right, if I look at my diagram, all right, if I look, all right, I don't have an arrow extending at H. Okay, so I don't actually have this ray, okay, because the way that this is written, all right, is it's telling me that K is the endpoint and then I'm extending forever in the direction of H, but H is an endpoint. All right, so this would actually be false. The proper way to name this ray would be ray HK, okay, because that's my endpoint and then I'm going forever in that direction of K. Okay, so ray HK is a ray in the diagram. All right, so that is our lesson on points, lines, and planes and our undefined terms. If you have any questions, you can comment in the video or in the comments below. And thank you so much for watching.